Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming today for the Elder Law and You Part 2. And my name is Lynn Drinkwater, and I'm the Moore County Senior Enrichment Center's Program Coordinator. And so we are lucky to get great people in our community to come and give educational presentations. And one of them is Jennifer Garner, and she's with Garner Law Firm. And she provided all the refreshments today, so thank you, Jennifer. And everybody by now should have a handout and a pin. And if there's somebody that doesn't have that, you could raise your hand and we'll get that to you. But it looks like everyone's covered, so that's wonderful. So this presentation is live streamed on our YouTube channel, just like last week's Part 1. And what that means is it's not only live so that if somebody is hearing me right now and if they have a question, they can use the chat box, put a question in, and at the end of the presentation, Jennifer will do her best to answer as many questions as she can. But then it actually lives on our YouTube channel. So if there's a part that all of a sudden you're like, you know, I got it when she was explaining it, but now that I'm reading my notes, if you're like me when you're putting notes together, what did this mean really? You can go back and watch it again, which is wonderful. Or you can go in there, click on it, and then send the link to a neighbor or a friend that wasn't able to get here today. So just to let you know, and we'll be doing that more and more now that we have this wonderful equipment at the Senior Center. So without further ado, here is Jennifer Garner with Elder Law Part 2. And thank you guys so much. And like I said before, if you not want coffee, it's outside in the lobby where the elevator is, just in the coffee cart. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer. And did you have this in here last time? Okay.
Thanks. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces today. I wanted to start out by just reminding everybody, especially folks that are watching this as a repeat, that nothing that I say today is specific legal advice for any particular individual, but I'm trying to just do a broad brush of information to make you aware of things that are out there and available to you in our community and in other locations. So it's always scary when attorneys have stuff out there on the internet that people can click on and watch and then come back at me later. So the easiest way and the funnest way, if we can make public benefits fun, is to kind of do a case study to go through specifics about how things would work if you were, in fact, Mickey or Minnie Mouse. So always try to use fun characters so that we make sure that things apply and you don't have to worry about me using anybody else's name or anybody local for sure. So let's start out with some basic facts, and then I tried to incorporate what we talked about last week as far as the documents and how to prepare your estate ahead of time so that you don't have crisis planning if we can avoid it. So Mickey and Minnie had lived and worked in Florida for most of their lives. They loved to golf and decided to avoid the rat race of a big city and moved to Pinehurst to retire. So after their move, they settled into their golf front condo. Mickey trips on his tail, he falls, and he breaks a hip. Although Mickey was beginning to show signs of aging and he was becoming quite forgetful at times, he had no specific diagnosis of a form of dementia. Mickey does have some existing heart issues which come from the stress of being Walt Disney's child. After surgery to repair his hip, Mickey wakes up, but he's rather confused and he's agitated. He may have had a reaction to anesthesia. He may have suffered a stroke during surgery or due to the stress of surgery. And he has new surroundings in the hospital. Sometimes we call that hospitalitis. You may have experienced that before. Everything's new and different. They keep the lights on 24 hours a day, and you get confused as to date and time and what's happening. So all of this might be taking a toll on Mickey. Minnie's very concerned about that. And of course, she's concerned about her capability of being able to care for him and what their financial needs might be able to cover and what benefits they might have available. So if Minnie walks into my office for a conference about all of this, what am I going to talk to her about? Well, they moved here from Florida. And like most folks that relocate, moves are hard, they're difficult, take a lot of time and energy, and probably not at the top of the list is going to hang out with an estate planning or elder law attorney as soon as you get here. Probably prefer to go to the club, play some tennis, swim, and of course he moved here hoping to do a lot of golfing. So we want to look at their documents, which are probably from Florida, and figure out whether we need to make changes. Chances are we need to make changes for all the healthcare documents because Minnie and Mickey have chosen to live here. Their doctors and all the healthcare facilities and hospitals will be governed by North Carolina laws. So we're going to talk to Minnie about financial powers of attorney, healthcare powers of attorney, living wills, medical directives, medical releases, how competent is Mickey, what's going on, was he doing pretty well before the hospital, should we give him a few days, let him get the anesthesia out of his system, adjust to his new medications, get some physical therapy started, and kind of see what his new normal is or whether he returns to the way he was prior to his trip. If he doesn't return to his normal state or to a state where we can feel comfortable preparing documents for his signature for him, then we have to talk about competency and how holding an incompetency hearing and going through guardianship proceedings. And of course, we want to look at any wills or trusts that they brought with them from Florida, because again, they probably reference a lot of state laws, and states can be very different, and individual needs and desires in those different locations will vary. So after a week in the hospital, Mickey is able to understand and he can execute his new legal documents. Very exciting when that happens. So everything is up to date in North Carolina for Minnie to be able to handle all of their financial and health matters if he is unable to at any point in the future. Mickey's now been notified that he's ready to be discharged. That's usually when the discharge planner walks in. And if you're lucky, that'll be about 3 days prior to them discharging you so that you have time to plan, so that Minnie would have time to visit different rehab centers, talk to friends and neighbors and others for recommendations. Sometimes that's the day before discharge, and that can put a lot of added pressure. Just remember that it is against federal law for a facility, hospital or nursing home, to discharge anyone if it's not a safe discharge. So if their opinion is we're just going to discharge you, plop you into this wheelchair and roll you out front, if there's not someone to pick you up, or if there's not someone to pick you up and take you to a safe location where your needs will be cared for, then that's an unsafe discharge, which is against federal law. So sometimes we have to extend hospital stays. That is very difficult. Medicare and a lot of insurance carriers will not pay for extra days just because you're not ready. So I do suggest to Minnie that she very much be Mickey's advocate. Talk to the nurse in charge on the floor, talk to his nurse, ask to see a discharge planner prior to the time that they might come and track her down, because we want to be sure that she's actually ready to handle everything and understands how much he can do on his own and what he needs help with. So discharge planners and work with the doctor that's in charge of discharging you to figure out whether you need any durable medical equipment ordered. Do you need a walker? Do you need a potty chair? Do you need a shower chair? And all of those things can be ordered. Insurance will often cover it so that you're not down at the home health store paying out of pocket for everything. But you have to time it just right. If you've already been discharged, the doctor can't go back and order all of that for you later. You have to work with your primary care doctor, who probably hasn't seen you when you're in the hospital, and that can be difficult for them to write prescriptions when they haven't laid eyes on you. So he needs to go to therapy, and for therapy, you usually get discharged to a skilled nursing center. So a skilled nursing center is what you or I consider as a nursing home, not an assisted living facility, and not home with home health care. So Mickey needs to have the skilled level of care because he does still have an incision from his hip replacement and things that need to be looked at by a nurse. Minnie's concerned about the cost and the proper care for Mickey. So what are we going to talk to Minnie about? We do want to make sure that she goes and visits some skilled nursing facilities. We want to think about where she lives. So she's on a lake in Pinehurst. So we probably want to talk to her about Quail Haven, Pinehurst Health and Rehab, some of the locations that might be easier for her to go and drop in and visit. We need to look at what Minnie's capabilities are and her comfort with driving. As you all know, traffic has gotten very crazy around here lately, and probably only worse as we have more golf events and things occurring here. So we don't really want Minnie to have to get up every morning and drive to Carthage to visit him if he were at peak resources. Maybe she goes into Aberdeen to have breakfast at Mason's with her friend 2 or 3 times a week, and there's a skilled nursing facility in Aberdeen called Accordius, and that would be somewhere that she might want to go visit and look. So we really want to get her out. We don't want her to just sit at the hospital and look at a list on a sheet of paper and try to choose which skilled facility she wants Mickey to go to. I always suggest, if at all possible, that my clients consider visiting a minimum of twice before they would ever place a loved one and decide on a facility. One, it's nice to go at a planned time when you know that the admissions director and other staff are available to see you and talk to you, which is great. Get the official tour, the official information, ask billing questions, insurance questions, ask about who the medical director and the doctor are for the facility, ask about their transportation services, visitation rules, etc. But you also want to go at least once on an unplanned visit. You want to be able to just walk in and ask if you can tour or walk through the facility or the rehab department, wherever your loved one's going to be, and just see what you observe. Are people being taken care of? Are the nurses attentive? Are there people on the halls? Are there people that are looking for help and aren't receiving help? How's the smell? How are there multiple things being stored in hallways that would be trip hazards for Mickey? We certainly don't want him to trip again and have any other issues. She needs to be prepared to advocate for Mickey for his care and making sure that he gets his days of therapy that he's entitled to and that he needs to recoup. And then she needs to become familiar with the rights of patients in facilities. So a lot of times I find that people feel like they give up all of their rights when they go into a facility. And that's not true. You have a lot of rights as a resident in a facility. You have a right to have visitors. Now, you're not allowed to have the big parties at 1 a.m. that you might have been having in your retirement golf condo. But as long as you're not disrupting others, you can have people visit 24/7. It's not the favorite thing of the staff because your being there does cause some issues, especially if Mickey has a roommate. That might be disruptive to folks. You have a right to mail, and your mail cannot be opened by the staff of the facility. Now, I don't recommend, other than maybe a get well card, that people start sending all of Mickey's mail to the facility, because I do see things get opened. I do, of course, see things get lost. But, if they wanted personal cards to go, that would be all right. And of course, they have access to records. So if Minnie wants to read through his records and see what the therapist is noting and how things are working, then that's perfectly appropriate for her to be able to do so, because I'm assuming that she's his healthcare agent and that she has a HIPAA release form signed by him, or that he's competent enough and capable to authorize her to review records. He, as the patient, can also review his own records. When you're admitted to a skilled nursing center, they also have to have what are called planning meetings, life care meetings, and those have to happen within a certain number of days from your admission. And usually what that is a multidisciplinary meeting. The best ones are when they can actually gather the nurse in charge, the social worker, the food and beverage dietary person, sometimes the billing person will attend, and the family members there, and the patient can be there if they're competent and capable of being there. and they review everything from all of those different angles. So how is your therapy going? How is the filing of your therapy charges with Medicaid or Medicare or supplemental insurance going? Are we seeing the bills being paid? Are we thinking about a discharge date? Are you doing better? Are you declining even though we're doing therapy? And they're wonderful meetings, and I do always make sure that my clients know to attend those at any time that the facility is willing. If someone becomes a permanent resident, they have to have those care plan meetings at least quarterly. So they're very, very informative. Always make sure that you meet with the facility bookkeeper. You don't want to just trust that the admissions person or the social worker that you talk to knows everything about your insurance plan and how that will be covered. Normally, there is a billing person in most of the skilled nursing facilities that is educated and experienced in how Medicare with a Blue Cross Blue Shield supplement works, or how does the first Medicare direct benefit work, and how many days will they pay for. And you want to be really careful that you know that up front, because you either have to cash out assets and have cash available to private pay, or you need to be making discharge plans when those benefits are running out and the services are not going to be covered. So investigate any long-term care insurance that you have. I do find that long-term care insurance policies can be complex. They're not easy to read. I think they do that on purpose. But also, they're not really anything that clients want to sit around and study and read in a lot of detail either. They're not fun. And they're all very different. So never sit down with the Bridge Club and have a little afternoon chat about long-term care insurance and how it worked for John and Bill and Doug. You want to know how your plan worked. These are sold by insurance companies, and insurance companies are, of course, private businesses that tweak and change their products, rightfully so. So you need to understand exactly what you purchased, whether there's any riders or additional coverage, and how your plan works. There's usually a deductible period, a period of time where you're supposed to be receiving services and either private paying for them, or maybe the deductible time will be the time that you're in the facility and Medicare and your supplement are paying for care. But you want to make sure that you apply for those benefits timely, because sometimes you have to send them a number of applications or a number of requests to actually get those benefits started. There's usually a daily rate with most of the traditional plans, which means they'll only cover a certain amount of the bill normally. Now, occasionally I see plans for folks that maybe worked in the car industry up in Detroit, where prices tend to be higher for assisted living and nursing home care. And they might have like a $300 a day benefit, which would cover most everything in Moore County. But I do see plans that have $150, $170 a day plan, and that's not going to cover the full daily benefit rate at the facility itself. So you'll have to plan how to cover that part privately that's not covered. Some plans cover home care, some plans don't cover home care. Traditional old policies, when healthcare, long-term healthcare started, those plans, you normally bought a rider to that policy if you wanted to get help at home. Help at home is much more common nowadays than it was 20 or 25 years ago. You have more home health agencies and folks that are able to step in and help out. And so you may or may not have a home care rider. So understand that sometimes in order to get your long-term care benefit paying, you have to actually be institutionalized. Be familiar with the terms in the policy. There's something called activities of daily living, ADLs. Most of these policies are written so that you have to need assistance and are unable to perform by yourself a certain number of ADLs. And so, as I always told my own family members that had long-term care insurance, please do not perform at your best when the long-term care nurse comes by to visit. Please do let her know that you need help with toileting or bathing, or that you can't stand long enough to cook a meal in the kitchen and you need help with meal preparation. But all of us have that natural instinct to sort of be at our best, especially when we're being examined. So do encourage them that it is to their own monetary benefit to not overperform. You sometimes see restrictions in long-term care policies on what type of agency you are allowed to use. And so be very careful with that as well. Some of them will require licensed home health care agencies, which work differently than registries and referral programs. And so before you choose your home health provider, you need to be sure that they are someone that can actually seek the reimbursement from that long-term care provider. There are a few policies, mostly the newer ones that I have seen, that allow private individuals without an agency to help out in certain circumstances and still be paid or reimbursed, or occasionally even a family member. Sometimes we have seen family members that would prefer to be with mom or dad than have strangers with mom and dad, but they can't afford to just quit their job and move in and help mom and dad. So they need or want to be compensated for that, rightfully so. And so sometimes they can take CNA classes, for example, and become a certified nursing assistant and be able to qualify under the plan to be paid, and that long-term care insurance would reimburse that expense. So lots of thorough reading before you pick or choose long-term care insurance if you're looking for that option. A lot of the traditional plans don't exist anymore in the marketplace, or they're very cost prohibitive. So if my clients are now purchasing long-term care insurance, for example, Mickey and Minnie would not be eligible, probably due to age and existing conditions. They'd never be able to afford or get a long-term care insurance program. But if someone in a younger generation was looking, a lot of times the insurance companies are doing kind of a combined life insurance / long-term care, where you might prepay for a life insurance policy, but you're allowed to pull from it early if you need it for home care. Some do that, and it's sort of like a certificate of deposit that you have with them, and then there's certain amounts you can pull for your care, which is not exactly the same as spending that CD at the bank for your care, because the insurance company is promising you a higher return if you go ahead and invest with them early, because they're banking on the fact that you're not going to need long-term care, or that you would only need it for a short period of time. So Minnie does all of the things that we talk about, and she transfers Mickey to Happy Putting Nursing Home, and he participates in his first week of therapy. But during that care conference, a therapist mentions a concern about Mickey's mental status, and the doctor orders more tests. Mickey is discharged from therapy because he's not progressing, and he's showing a markable decline. So he is, instead of being on a plateau where that therapy is maintaining his current level or being on the upward curve of actually improving, Mickey's declining, even though they're there and they're providing him with all of the therapy. So, and he's now unable to walk, so there's not a lot of therapy they can do with him. So Minnie contacts the elder law attorney again and says, what do I do now? We thought we were going to be in therapy for 2 or 3 months and he would come home. What do I do? So most of us would discuss hospice with Minnie, just so that she understands how hospice and palliative care work, trying to maintain the quality of life versus the quantity of life. Most of your Medicare, well, all of the standard Medicare A and B would cover hospice and palliative care costs, so there's no out of pocket, but they're not there with you 24/7. So you still have to have the facility or the ability to do the care yourself as the family member and caregiver, or have the ability to pay those caregivers to come in if she were to bring him home. A lot of my clients did not realize that if you do have hospice benefits, that you can use that in a facility. And I strongly encourage its use in a facility. And I've never met a facility that does not allow hospice to come in and assist. You can never go wrong with a second pair of eyes. So you'll have a nurse in charge at a skilled nursing center. You'll have CNAs, you'll have some LPNs, you'll have med techs, you'll have people checking on your loved one all the time. But if they know that hospice is coming in to check as well, or hospice comes in and helps provide extra supplies, they pick up the cost of things like Depends and the bed liners and maybe some of the medications related to Mickey's actual terminal diagnosis. And it's always good to have extra people going in and out. If Mickey had served in the military, there's a great group of hospice volunteers that are veterans that come out and visit and speak to that person. There's regular volunteers. Maybe some huge Walt Disney fans would come by and want to talk to him and meet with him about his true experience of living there and growing up there. And so I definitely would encourage a hospice consult, because if he's continuing to decline, then it may in fact be time for hospice to come in and just assist the whole family. Maybe she just really, yes, ma'am. So she asked the question of whether there's much difference between for-profit and nonprofit hospice. I think it depends on the community. In my personal experience, I think the nonprofits have a lot of additional services to be offered because they are so well supported by the community. So right here locally, for example, First Health Hospice has a huge hospice foundation that our community overwhelmingly supports. So they have a much greater ability to provide more volunteers and more social services, more grief counseling, and more preparation for the family and the patient as to what's going to occur next. Having said that, there's at least one for-profit hospice that works here in our community, which is Liberty Hospice. And they have some wonderful people working for them, some great aides, bath aides, nurses, etc. But of course, they don't have the nonprofit support of a huge foundation that provides all of the extras. So it really depends on what you can get and where you are. Yes, ma'am. Well, yeah, so you do have to advocate heavily for benefits. They're not always available. There are times that things are not, they consider the patient to be uncooperative. And sometimes that's just because of the caregiving situation and the relationship that the caregivers have. Caregivers, especially family members, spouses, and children, always seem to end up being the bad guys because they're the ones that we've lived with long term, and it's okay to focus our anger about dying or becoming disabled. And so it's harder to get the patients to cooperate with the family, but it's not always an option to bring in outside. There is restorative therapy benefits under Medicare Part B, which are ordered by a doctor, which is probably the program that hospice was using to help provide the gentleman in this example with restorative therapy benefits under hospice, because that doesn't really conflict with the overall hospice theme of making sure that someone's comfortable and taken care of, but not receiving treatment or not, like if you had a cancer diagnosis and that was your terminal condition, you're not supposed to be getting, chemotherapy and surgery and radiation. You're saying, I know that all of that's not going to really help me anymore, so I would choose the palliative and hospice route to have the best quality of my final days. Now, sometimes during that hospice and palliative care time, you might receive chemo or radiation if it is controlling pain or shrinking the size of a mass that's pressing on something and causing problems. So it's not always mutually exclusive, which is true for therapy as well. You can't be receiving therapy to improve and get better if you're using your hospice and palliative care benefit. But if it is keeping you from, your limbs restricting or your hands curling up or your muscles tightening and causing you discomfort and pain, then they may be able to do some limited therapy under restorative therapy to help you out. Mhm. Correct. So palliative care is kind of the pre-step to hospice. And so during palliative care, they're trying to, let you live for absolutely for as long as you can and just trying to manage your symptoms and keep you steady. And then you reach a point where, based on all the little boxes and all the little codes that the Medicare benefits establish, you have to continue to meet the criteria for palliative, or they have no choice to push you to hospice. And under the true hospice benefit, you're not going to receive any kind of therapy or restorative therapy. So I'm sure it's Medicare that stopped your husband's therapy. Definitely not. So palliative is the stepping stone to hospice care. So you're just trying to manage symptoms and maintain somebody at their current level as long as possible. And then any hint at a decline or change, you switch to hospice care, which brings in more for pre-death preparation. So Mickey's there. Minnie does the hospice consult. She talks about bringing Mickey home for in-home care, but she realizes that because he can't walk and turn himself and move himself, he's really a 24-hour care patient. He needs to be rolled and moved and lifted, and she just can't do that by herself. And does not feel that she has the assets to do that for him long-term at home. The average 24/7 care that you would receive, at least in our county alone, is probably about $14,000 a month. So about twice the average cost of care for a nursing facility to have your loved one at home, assuming you keep it staffed 24/7. With clients that we've had that are unable to move on their own, transition from, bed to a chair, bed to a wheelchair, where we have to bring in double duty nurses. Of course, that increases the cost, and we would only do that during limited time periods where we thought that it would be a good idea to, get out to the sun porch, go outside, or maybe get to a doctor's appointment. The other thing that I would discuss very clearly with Minnie and hopefully with Mickey as well, if he could follow our conversation and add to that, because he would be a client as well in this planning process, would be, is Minnie a caregiver? Does Minnie have the qualities, the ability to handle the stress and the anxiety and the overload of being a caregiver? Some of us just aren't. And so if you had children, you kind of know whether you're a caregiver or not. What kind of mom or dad were you? Were you active and involved with them? Was it okay if the baby spit up all over you, or was that kind of the end of your rope and somebody else had to step in and help you? Did your husband ever change the baby's diaper? Because if he never did, he's probably not going to change yours. And you need to understand that they may just not be caregivers. And that brings up a whole nother set of discussions that you need to have to be prepared for how am I going to age? And maybe I want to stay home, but if no one's there to take care of me, then that's probably not something that I can even consider. So we talk about facilities. If he needs to stay at the skilled level of care, of course, she could keep him at Happy Putting Nursing Home and just move him from a rehab bed to a permanent bed. Or if she was unhappy there for any reason, or the drive was too long, or she had a fallout with the discharge nurse or whatever it may be, maybe the nurse in charge, the nursing director, recently moved to another nursing facility and she'd really like to follow that nursing director, then she needs to start looking for open bed spots and planning for a move. Maybe he's improved enough that he could go to assisted living. Given my fact scenario that we're going over, that's not going to happen, but sometimes it does. So sometimes that patient rehabs well enough that they can go into an assisted living situation but can't quite come home because it's too much care at home. Assisted living is not a nursing home. It's governed by North Carolina rules and regulations only. And they usually have a medical doctor and or a registered nurse that's available to the facility, but you won't find them just walking the halls. It looks more like just a retirement community. You have your own room or your own suite. You're in control of that. You lock your door, you come and go as you want to. They come in and clean and change the sheets and do all the yucky stuff. But they prepare 3 meals a day. They have snacks available. They have a full-time activities director. They can do medication management for you. They have those wonderful community buses and vans that take you everywhere. You can participate in the Christmas parades and all kinds of great stuff. But that's assisted living level of care. So right now, Mickey can't walk. He's unable to transfer himself. So that's not going to be an option for her. She could do a combination of care. She could do hospice with the facility. She could do hospice with at-home care. Maybe Huey, Dewey, and Louie, who were Donald Duck's nephews, were very close to Mickey and Minnie because they had no children. So maybe they're willing to come up and take some shifts and help her out. It kind of depends on his life expectancy and what's going to happen as to what makes sense for the family. But how's she going to pay for any of it? So let's talk briefly about Medicare. I've brought Medicare up. Most of you are probably familiar with Medicare. It's become a little more complex in the last 10, 15 years because we have more plans than we used to have. So your standard entitled Medicare. So if you worked and you paid into the system, you were entitled to Medicare benefits at age 65. That's your A and B, Medicare A and B. If you have retained your traditional Medicare A and B, A covers your hospital type care and B covers your everyday doctor, your durable medical equipment, and your home health visits or care, maybe after a surgery if you were discharged to home. If you chose to give up your traditional A and B, then you are a Part C Medicare recipient. Part C is relatively new in terms of the Medicare program. It is a private and public combined program. So the government let private industry come in and bid and create Medicare Part C programs. What some people don't understand is you gave up your A and B when you chose your C. So first Medicare Direct, some of the Humana plans, a lot of the state retirement systems and some of the corporate retirement systems switched to these plans as well. They operate more like major medical plans did when you were younger, and you may have had employer insurance. They have networks, so you have to see certain providers or get referrals to certain other providers. You usually have co-pays. Sometimes you have a monthly premium, sometimes you don't, just depends on your shopping for benefits. And you usually have a deductible as well, a total out of pocket that you need to pay before they kick in 100%. So my general recommendation to my clients is to not just automatically switch to a Part C plan unless you have thoroughly investigated it and sort of looked at what is my health, how often do I see my doctor, how many specialists do I see, are the ones that I see and like and get referred to in the network, how often do I travel? If you travel a lot or you go to stay in Florida for 3 months every summer, then you probably don't want to go to Florida in the summer, probably go in the winter. I'll reverse that. You go to Canada in the summer. I know the real reason you guys are here today. They have air conditioning. So when you pull into the parking lot at 9:45 and it's already 84 degrees, you know it's going to be a rough day out there. Yes.
Yeah. At home to hear. So as far as what Jennifer was just saying about jumping off your traditional Medicare and making a decision based on hearing from your neighbor or watching Joe Namath or JJ Walker on the commercials, we have a SHIP counselor. SHIP stands for Seniors Health Insurance Information Program. So it's SHIP with two I's, like I, Captain. And we at the Moore County Department of Aging and all throughout North Carolina have SHIP coordinators on site and SHIP counselors. And Dan Woodall, raise your hand, please, Dan. He is wonderful. He's experienced from the Charlotte area, moved here several years ago, walked in my office and said, hey, I'm a SHIP counselor and I'd love to be a SHIP counselor here now that I moved. I was like, well, I just hit the lottery because now I don't even have to train anybody. He just comes in, he knows what he's talking about, and he's so wonderful to speak with. So you can actually call and schedule appointments with Sharon Sherlock, Dan Woodall. You don't typically schedule with an actual person. It's just, or the specific person. You just call and make an appointment, and whoever they have available, they will help you. But they all work together as a team, and I'm part of that team. So we can all put our heads together. Whatever we can't have an answer for, we can head up to the Raleigh office by phone call or by an email. And the gurus up there that help train every SHIP coordinator and SHIP counselor throughout the whole state, they're there available to us to help us figure out problems and situations. Everybody is unique. So when people used to come in my office and they'd say, I want the same plan that my neighbor down the street has because he only pays this much. And my question always is, okay, do they have the same medical background as you? Do they take the same medicines as you? Do they have, there's a lot of different situations and information that goes into figuring out what might be the best plan for you. So we are not licensed insurance agents. We are here to help educate people on what Medicare is, and we are here to help you figure out situations, give you the tools so that you can then make an actual educated, informative information decision instead of guessing. We don't want to guess. Yes. And that's probably because everybody is unique, like I was just saying, and your husband might have worked for a company in some other place that there's a pension that goes along with it, or there's reasons for it. And I don't want to take up all the time, so we can talk afterwards. Well, depending on the situation. Once again, there's people that work for the railroad. There's people that are veterans. They have a totally different situation. People who work for Dow, they have a certain difference. Everybody is so unique. And that's why we have to meet one-on-one. So I just wanted to let you know there are options, and then you can come here for that information. Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, most definitely. We have to go through 13 hours of an online course. You've got to pass that with a 85%. And then we have to go through quarterly training, which is every 3 months we have to do a training, and it's constant. Yes. It stands for Seniors Health Insurance Information Program. Believe me, when I first started and I was the SHIP coordinator, it took me a long time to try to remember what that was. But once I have it, now I can say it in my sleep. But anyway, I just wanted to jump in and say that. So thank you so much, Jennifer.
You're welcome. She does an awesome commercial for them. I was going to mention that you could come here and do that, but I never could have done what Lynn did. So that's great. And so traveling was one of the things I was going to point out. If you travel a lot or you spend time in other states, programs are completely different in other areas because remember, this is private companies deciding where they want to operate and how they want to operate, and then coordinating under those Medicare C guidelines that were established by the government. So if you move, that's also another issue because if you move, you need to study what's covered and not covered. If they had the Walt Disney 101 plan when they lived in Florida, I can guarantee you First Health and Pinehurst Medical and Pinehurst Surgical know nothing about the Walt Disney 101 plan. And so they probably are not in the network. They are probably not going to necessarily accept them in as patients unless alternate payment is provided. And in order to receive services, in my experience with what clients have gone through, in order to receive services outside of network, it's got to be a severe emergency. So if my client goes to the beach for the weekend and falls and twists an ankle really badly, my personal advice to them is do not risk it and go to the hospital at the beach. If it's only 2 hours and 10 minutes to come back to First Health that's in your network, come back. It's a long, painful ride, but come back because you don't want to personally owe that emergency room and that radiologist and everybody that's out of network. So be careful if you switch. Sometimes it's a wonderful savings. And if you're relatively healthy, don't have a lot of doctors, don't have any terrible diagnoses, don't have medical histories in your family that you just think you're not going to be able to avoid, then really Part C might work for you, but know what you're doing. Part D is the prescription drug benefit. If you have traditional A and B, chances are you've purchased a supplement from a private insurance carrier to cover what Medicare A and B don't cover. So Medicare A and B, in very, very simplified terms, cover basically 80%. So if I go to Pinehurst Surgical and I meet with, Dr. Joe, and Dr. Joe says, well, I'm going to charge died. So, okay. I can usually yell. I have 3 teenagers. So, where was I? I was on Part D and supplements. So you would purchase a supplement to go along with your Medicare A and B.
Hello, this one sounds very loud. All right. We're on a delay. That's cool. Thank you.
All right. That sounds better. Now I can hear myself. Okay, so let's talk about Medicaid. There's lots and lots of Medicaid programs. And I'm going to talk about one in detail here in a minute as we place Mickey into the skilled nursing facility permanently. And so there are other Medicaid programs that might help people with drug costs, might help people with other issues, and aid to family with dependent children, aid to pregnant women, lots of Medicaid programs. So we're going to narrow in on the one that helps you pay for long-term care here in a couple minutes, but all Medicaid benefits are under the welfare umbrella of the government. And so where Medicare was an entitlement because you paid in, and you're entitled to Medicare benefits, you are not entitled to Medicaid benefits. Medicaid benefits are under the welfare umbrella of the government, and you have to qualify based on assets and income. So special assistance. Special assistance is a very limited Medicaid waiver program in North Carolina. I don't like when people refer to it as Medicaid, but I do see that a lot of assisted living facilities will say, oh, yes, we take Medicaid, or no, we don't take Medicaid. It is actually a pot of money that the federal government created and said, okay, states, if you want to help people that live at the assisted living rest home level of care, we will give you some money if you create a program and we approve your program. So North Carolina sent in an application years and years ago to the federal government and said, here's what we will do for people, and here are the criteria that we've established. And the government said, okay, we approve that as part of our Medicare waiver offerings. And so North Carolina receives a pot of money from the feds, and they've created this program. It helps you pay for, not skilled nursing, it helps you pay for assisted living level of care, like a memory care unit in an assisted living facility or just basic assisted living. It is very restrictive. It has what we call income caps. It looks at your gross income, so your gross Social Security check before Medicare premiums are deducted, for example, or your gross pension check before you pay for your supplemental insurance policy with your prior employer, or your life insurance benefit, or anything else that gets deducted from that pension. It's approximately 12, I don't want to misquote it. So for regular assisted living, if you were just there because you needed some help with meal preparation and safety purposes, you have to have gross income of less than $1,248 a month. For a special care unit, a dementia care unit, you have to have gross income of less than $1,581 a month. So there are not a lot of people that meet that income cap requirement and fall below that. There are no exceptions. If you are 1 penny over, you are over. And you have to find a facility that's willing to accept that benefit. There are not a lot of facilities that will accept that benefit, and there is nothing you can do to force them to accept that benefit. That is a business choice of theirs. So very limited program, at least in our area, for actually being able to be used. Mickey needs skilled level of care, so we're not even going to approach that one with many. Veterans benefits. There are veterans benefits available to folks that served in the military. They vary depending on your specific military service. So there is no standard program that I can tell you that you definitely qualify for. I like to lump them into 3 different categories. One being healthcare. As a veteran, you may be eligible for health care benefits. Those come in many different shapes and forms. Can be seeing a doctor, could be seeing a doctor for psychiatric issues, PTSD, etc. Could be for hearing aids, could be for glasses. Anything related to your health care could technically be for long-term care. I'm just not finding that there are a lot of veterans homes and facilities with rooms for veterans right now. They still seem to have enough active duty folks needing their services and coming through that there's not a lot for the retirees available, but you never know. So that's healthcare. Then you have disability. If you served and you believe you have a disability that is connected to your service and you can prove that it's connected to your service, then you can receive a disability check. You might be rated 0% disabled all the way up to 100% disabled. A lot of people never went back after service, which can be understandable. Once they were discharged, they were done and they moved on. But if you were a gunner and you were constantly working with loud machinery right next to you, you may have hearing loss that's actually connected to your disability, to your service, so that you would qualify for disability. We see disability being given for a lot of Agent Orange folks, mostly from Vietnam. And those have expanded greatly. I think we're up to 4 to 6 pages of conditions, and if you qualify for any of those conditions, they are presumptive conditions. You automatically qualify for veterans benefits if you fall into any of those categories. And you just have to show that you were in the service and that you were somewhere where you were exposed directly to Agent Orange, which used to just be boots on the ground. You had to be out there in the jungle that they were actively spraying. They've expanded it, for example, to blue water veterans, which were the guys out on the boats off the coast. Well, where do you think the aircraft was going after it came back from spraying? It was landed on the aircraft carrier, and they were all running out there to secure and maintain and care for the aircraft carrier, unload and reload, etc. So of course they were exposed, but they fought for years with Congress to get approved, but they're now approved. Third category is pension. So there's multiple different pension programs that veterans may qualify for. This has nothing to do with retirement and years of service. It's not the same. Pension is basically rated on assets and income. So we have some veterans that have very few assets and a very low income. They may be eligible for just a standard pension payment because of their need for assets for basic survival. They may be homebound, and that qualifies them for a homebound pension. There are ancillary programs to that might build ramps for them or make improvements to bathrooms where if they are disabled or just elderly, they may have better access around their home. And the one you hear about the most when you talk about aging and long-term care is the aid and attendance program. The aid and attendance program does deal with your assets and your income and how much you're spending on medical care. And so sometimes we see veterans use that program to help cover the cost of assisted living or help cover the cost of expenses for in-home care. If assets and income are very low, I usually go with the Medicaid program versus the Veterans program, because the Veterans program does not give you enough monthly to actually privately pay a nursing home. You'd have to have considerable income in addition to that VA benefit to actually be able to write a check to the facility. So I don't see it working as well for skilled nursing. And it's a lot of paperwork. If you are a veteran or your spouse is a veteran, please be sure that you know where the DD-214 is, and hopefully it's the original one with the seals on it. So that's the discharge paperwork they were given when they were discharged. That shows exactly where they served, how long they served, that they were honorably discharged, whether they served during active duty, wartime or not, and those benefits all vary on your service record. We have a wonderful Moore County Veterans Service Office. I highly encourage you to visit them. They're in Carthage in the Agriculture Building. You can call and get an appointment with them. They do an absolutely wonderful job of walking veterans through all of the various programs that might be available to you. If you don't qualify, it doesn't mean that you can't qualify. So there are some planning techniques that you can do to make you eligible. For example, with assets, gifting assets, but there is gifting penalties and timelines and things that you do have to follow with that. So Mickey and Minnie worked hard all their lives. As we know, they had no children. They have not accumulated a large amount of assets, as they were always very generous with all those neighborhood children at Disney. But here's their asset list. They have a joint checking account with $30,000. Minnie has life insurance of $5,000. Mickey has life insurance at $5,000. Mickey also had a short time in the service, so he has a VA policy for $2,000. Disney carries life insurance on them in the amount of $50,000. They have stocks and bonds worth $170,000 that they hold jointly together. They bought their condo here in North Carolina. It's worth $150,000. Wish we could find that in the current market. But they do have a $75,000 mortgage on it. They have their home in Disney. So their home in Disney, they own half, but that's the most that you can own in Disney because Walt always keeps at least a 50% ownership of all of the property there. They own an interest in the Disney cruise ship. They have a golf cart, of course. Mickey came to play golf, and Minnie has her flashy little red convertible. They have their household furnishings and their miscellaneous personal property. Just like most of us, they've downsized when they moved here and chose to retire, so they don't have as much to deal with as they used to. But one of the things that Minnie would not give up was her large collection of bows. So Minnie needs to take care of herself. She needs to make sure she's going to her own doctor's appointments, taking care of personal matters for herself and any spiritual needs that she has. She is also encouraged to join support groups and different associations that are related to Mickey's illness. I really encourage my clients to participate in local support groups. During COVID, of course, a lot of that transitioned to online, but most of those groups and associations like Dementia NC, for example, or the Alzheimer's Association, most all of those transitioned very well to online platforms where you could still participate or listen to others giving information. So Minnie meets with an elder law attorney, and she decides she's going to file a Medicaid application for Mickey. So how do we go about this Medicaid program for long-term care? We know it covers only a skilled nursing center, but we've already decided that the skilled nursing level of care is appropriate for Mickey. Now, it's a federal program, it's a state program, and it's locally administered. So as you can imagine, when you get 3 different governmental entities involved, it's a rather complex and ever-changing program. You make an application at the local Department of Social Services. So the first thing they have to establish for Mickey is that this level of care is medically necessary. So a doctor has to complete what's called an FL2 form. The doctor needs to complete that so that the answer at the bottom of the form is that Mickey needs skilled nursing care. So you want a good relationship with your doctor. Income. There is no income cap for this Medicaid program. However, they do have to look at all of your income sources. They look at the income of Mickey. They do not look at Minnie's income for the purposes of qualifying Mickey. So what does Mickey have? He gets gross Social Security of $1,275 a month, and he gets a nice big pension from Walt of $350 a month. So he passes the income test, because if we look at his total income, can he write a check to a nursing home for the average cost of care? No. He's way below the average cost of care. In North Carolina, it's currently $7,300 a month. So he passes the medical test, he passes the income test. Now we need to look at his resources and his assets. They look at all of his assets and all of Minnie's assets. There is no advantage to Minnie moving everything to her name the day before she goes to social services, okay? They look at both of you. So we went over his asset list, and we need to figure out what's countable and what's non-countable. So we have two buckets going. In our countable bucket, we have the joint checking account. That's cash available to pay bills. We have the stocks and the bonds, and we've got the cruise ship. So we have $300,000 sitting in countable assets. So Mickey has to be at $2,000 or below to qualify. So we're not there yet. Non-countable, things that Medicaid needs to know about, and they need to all be proven to them, but they're going to put them in the non-countable bucket. Life insurance. The life insurance that they own were two $5,000 policies. Those policies could be cashed out by them if they were whole life and had a cash value. So they would be countable, but Medicaid says it's okay to have $10,000 in face value of life insurance. So those become non-countable. The Disney life insurance is not owned by them. They can't access it. They were employed by Disney, and Walt made the decision that he would provide that $50,000 in life insurance to his employees. They can't cash it out. All they can do is name a beneficiary. So it's non-countable. Yes, ma'am. Yes. So the way that that usually works, though, if you have life insurance that exceeds the face value, we have to look at the cash value. And the cash value is the countable asset. So if we had a $30,000 policy on Mickey that he owned, we would be over the $10,000 face value. So we have to take it out of the non-countable bucket. We kind of hold it here and we say, okay, now tell us what the cash value is. Depending on how old the policy is and how much he's paid in, the insurance company, and only the insurance company, from a real math whiz hidden in a basement somewhere doing actuarial work, will tell us what the cash value is. If the cash value is $6,000, then we have $6,000 in our countable basket, not the 30 because he hasn't died. So we have to plan around that. Do we keep the insurance? Do we have Huey, Dewey, and Louie chip in and buy the policy from him and give him $6,000 in cash, and then they keep up the premiums and they get the $30,000 when he dies? So just a whole lot of different ways to look at that if you're over. The Disney life insurance had no value. They can't get anything from it, so it's non-countable. Minnie's convertible is not countable because the couple is allowed to have one vehicle. They want Minnie to be able to go see Mickey. They want Minnie to be able to take him to the doctor and take care of him, so she can keep her convertible. The condo in North Carolina is non-countable because we have said that Mickey intends to return home. Now, that may not really be practical. That may not be safe. But I have yet to meet anyone in a nursing facility in their right mind that doesn't say, I'm going home. So you just have to have that intent to return home. If they had a very expensive home here, so if Walt had paid them much better and they were living right on Pinehurst number 2, they can only have equity in their home totaling $636,000 or less. So we do have a problem if they had a big fancy $2 million home and only had a $75,000 mortgage. They wouldn't be able to protect their home. And that number is indexed to change on an annual basis. They had the home in Disney. The home in Disney doesn't count because there's that other owner. Remember, Walt owns 50%. And we can't force Walt to sell his 50% just because Mickey needs care. So that's not countable. They can keep the golf cart, they can keep the household furnishings and all the miscellaneous personal property because those are just things. If they were collections, if they had a collection of original Van Gogh paintings hanging in their condo, those would be collections, and I feel pretty certain DSS would argue that those have value that we need to put over here in the countable bucket like an investment. So you can't go out and just buy a handful of diamonds and hide all of your money in diamonds because you've invested in those diamonds. But if you have your diamond engagement ring and the one that you got when your mom passed away, those are just personal assets and property. Minnie's bow collection, unfortunately, we hated to tell her, but it does not have any additional value. So that's in the non-countable bucket, not an investment. So what do? Minnie, of course, is very concerned. She's thinking that she has to spend down to $2,000 and she's just not going to have anywhere to live herself. And she's looking for, a room to rent somewhere in Pinehurst and doesn't know what she's going to do. Well, that spouse gets to retain half of the countable bucket. So if we look at the countable bucket, it was $300,000. Minnie gets to keep half with certain maximums and minimums, and I've typed those in for you on the handout. So half would be $150,000, but the maximum that she can keep under the guidelines is $137,400. So she does have to spend a little bit of her money as well as his portion of the overage. All right, so the asset limit for Mickey is $2,000. Basically, we have $148,000 or more to spend. So what are we going to do? What does Mickey need? If you guys have been to a nursing home lately, they're not really decorated well and they're not personalized. Don't we want to personalize it for Mickey? We know he loves red. We know he loves black. He likes his big shoes. He might want some pictures from Disney. We want to really just make it his room. He's getting forgetful. We want him to be able to find his room. So we send Minnie out shopping. And we say, make sure he has all the clothing he needs. Make sure he's got supplies. Does he want a TV? Does he want a computer, a wheelchair? Medicare will buy you that really basic, boring wheelchair. But if you're sitting in that most of the day, it's very uncomfortable. There's no back support. There's no support for your head. So maybe we want to buy a fancy wheelchair. We want to get him some snacks, maybe stockpile some snacks at home. Apparently, he's a big cookie eater. There are not always cookies available at the facility for him, so she wants to be able to go in and visit him and take him some cookies. And of course, we want his room decorated, get him a fancy, comfy bedspread, etc. We also need to remember that as people decline and as people age, we tend to lose our appetites, which normally means that we lose weight. Sometimes we're not eating well at home. We move into a facility. They're actually giving us 3 meals a day. And sometimes we actually see folks gain weight. So we like people to plan ahead with clothing selections. Also remember, if somebody's becoming incontinent, it is much easier to get sweatpants and elastic waisted pants on and off. And it's easier for caregivers to do so if we shop ahead and make sure we have the right sizes and maybe a variety of sizes. Always want to make sure that you mark them with a permanent marker, like a Sharpie marker, because they go into the industrial wash and then they get parceled back out based on what the tag says. So you don't want to go to visit Mickey and find Donald wearing his outfit. Unless it doesn't bother Mickey, and then we don't want to start a fight, and it's okay. How do we use the rest of the money to Minnie's benefit? Well, let's go ahead and pre-play all of our funeral, cremation, and burial plans. So she'll go sit down with her chosen funeral home director. She'll go through what they want, what they don't want, what kind of flowers they want. Maybe they want to be shipped back to special area at Disney where they're allowed to spend eternity. We need to include shipping costs. We need an honorarium for the minister that's going to speak. We want to be sure all of that's included and paid for, and that does not count against them. Has to be irrevocable. They don't have to pay for burial plots because Walt has a spot for them at Disney. We do want to pay the mortgage off. We hate to see many struggle and have to make a mortgage payment every month. So we take some of that extra money and we make sure the mortgage is paid off. The roof on the house down in Disney is looking pitiful, needs to be redone. Don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but it's kind of a tiled roof like you would have seen in Spain or somewhere. So very expensive to replace, but they agree with Walt that they'll split it 50-50 and they spend $10,000 on a roof. They live in a condo. Condos come with assessments and dues. So they're allowed to pay their current assessments and their current dues so that Minnie doesn't have any big bills. We always look at things that are expensive, that always surprise us when they come in the mail, that we dread every year, like our homeowner's insurance and our auto insurance. We can't prepay anything under the Medicaid rules, but we can pay bills that are due. So if we know that the homeowner's insurance bill will be here in the next couple of weeks, we can call the agent and get the amount and get a bill from him and go ahead and make those payments. While we're doing all this planning and making sure that we're happy with Mickey's location and where he is, and that's where we want him to stay, Minnie is going to go ahead and pay a couple months of care to Happy Putty Nursing Home while we're getting everything ready for a Medicaid application. And then Minnie decides that that convertible is just a little too difficult for her. She can't seem to get the top up and down as easily as she used to be able to. And it's about impossible to pick Mickey up and take him out for the afternoon. So she decides a small SUV would be better. She trades that convertible in and spends an extra $27,000 to get into a small SUV, which is more practical for their future. Okay, so all of that's done, and Mickey now qualifies for benefits. Do we stop there? No, a good planner won't stop there. You'll want to because you'll be exhausted, and that's a lot of paperwork and a lot of running around, and she's probably just ready to head to Florida for a couple months and take a break. But what if she heads to Florida and she gets into an accident and dies? If her will was one of those nice little sweetheart wills that left everything back to Mickey, she's now died and Mickey gets everything back and we have to start over. So we probably want to talk to Minnie, and maybe that's what she wants. Maybe their goal, they didn't have children, it's money they saved. She's perfectly happy with that money being used to take care of Mickey. Maybe it could pay for a private room instead of a shared room. Maybe he could move somewhere closer to Huey, Dewey, and Louie, who would check in on him if she died. So maybe she wants to keep it the same. But a lot of clients prefer to either leave it in trust for Mickey. It's called a special needs trust for your spouse, where it only provides the extras. So it would go into trust for Mickey, and he would still qualify for Medicaid, but with Minnie gone, who's going to bring him fresh clothing, and who's going to buy his cookies, and who's going to pay for a caregiver to spend some time with him on the holidays in her absence? So maybe she'll do a trust for him. She could disinherit him and just decide she's going to leave it to Huey, Dewey, and Louie because she knows that they'll take care of him. I caution people about what they know. Wait till you're gone. So Huey, Dewey, and Louie may just take a vacation and never see Mickey again. Or they may be wonderful nephews and come and spend time. We never know. So if she disinherits Mickey, you do need to understand that in North Carolina, you cannot disinherit your spouse. Your spouse is entitled to receive a portion of your estate, but they have to elect to receive a portion. I could foresee, depending on budgeting, that at some point some states are going to jump in and say, well, we, the state who's paying to take care of Mickey, are going to exert his right to elect part of Minnie's estate. I haven't seen it yet, though. Now it's out there on the internet. So they may be working on trying to come up with something to that effect. So we might not be able to do disinheriting wills, or if we do, we always understand we're taking a chance at doing that. We don't want, even if Minnie survives Mickey, we don't want Mickey to have assets in his name when he dies, because the federal government requires the state to file a claim in Mickey's estate for everything they have spent on him. So if Mickey stays there for a couple of years, the state of North Carolina has this giant bill that just keeps printing and printing, and that's their claim. And they file it in the clerk of court's office, and it's a claim against his estate. So if he has assets in his estate or in any type of revocable trust that he can access prior to his death, those assets have to reimburse the state for the care. So you've still accomplished something because the state pays a lot less than you or I would pay privately for the care, but you have to pay it back. And that's federal law. You can't escape that one unless you go overseas. So we don't want to leave Mickey jointly on the condo, for example. We would want to have one of those really well-drafted powers of attorney we talked about last week, where we have some gifting provisions and some allowable transfers. So we would want to take Mickey off of the title to the condo as an example and make sure it was in Minnie's name alone, because we don't want it to be involved in his estate in any way, shape, or form. Same with the joint checking. If the joint checking has too much money in it, they're also going to have a claim against it. And on the joint checking account, if it goes above $2,000, Mickey has the right to that money just like Minnie does. So he'd be disqualified from care anyway. So we would go in and look individually at each of these assets and make sure that they were planned appropriately. Yes, ma'am. So the question was whether you do that ahead of time. Well, if I had the crystal ball, I would love to do all the planning ahead of time. My problem is that you never know when the right time to do it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the time that you're putting things into the countable and non-countable box, you're also thinking about and talking about how does this need to be moved and or titled. And so some of it can be done at the same time. For example, the stocks and bonds probably pretty much go away, or the cruise ship, for example, gets sold, because remember, we need the cash to do all these other things we were going to do to get them prepared for benefits. So some assets just disappear because we spend them and transfer them. But we probably would set up like an individual checking account for Minnie, for example, and move the bulk of the cash into that, just because Medicaid would never have to look at that account again. So that's an important part. Once somebody qualifies for Medicaid benefits, their spouse is no longer considered to be in their budget unit, so they don't look at the spouse again. So let's say that Minnie decides to start buying lottery tickets after Mickey is at the facility, staying long-term and qualified for Medicaid, and Minnie hits the jackpot. That's Minnie's money. That's not Mickey's money. So she might choose to spend money on him and move things around, but he would remain Medicaid eligible. Yes, ma'am. So the question is about a life insurance policy. The transfer of any assets are included in what we call the 5-year look back, which is federal law. So at the time that Minnie applies for the coverage at the Department of Social Services for Mickey, she is asked, and she signs under the penalties of perjury with the federal government, that she promises that they haven't given anything away or transferred anything for less than fair market value. Because if they've given things away, for every $7,110 that they give away, he is penalized from coverage of care for a month. And that month doesn't kick in until he's eligible. So now he's down to $2,000 and he has a month penalty because he gave, Huey $7,200 for his college tuition. That's a gift. And so he's penalized. So the question that was asked dealt with a life insurance policy and whether you could start transferring those things out of the spouse's name so that they were not the owners. You have to be careful with life insurance and really understand the policy, whether it's transferable, and if it's transferable, how does that affect the taxability of the benefit? And so it's something I would want you to do with an agent and with a CPA involved, because you can change. If I own a life insurance policy on myself and I leave it to my children, when I die, they get those funds and there's no tax consequence to those funds. It's possible, and I don't know the details of it. I'm not a code head don't know all the IRS code. So there is an event in where you transfer a life insurance policy to someone else, and it changes that payout to a taxable event. And it involves the gifting of the policy and the changing of names. And so you do have to be cautious about, number one, gift tax and gift tax returns for what you're transferring, but also, are you changing the tax consequence of the benefit that's being received? But certainly you could look at your assets now and decide if there are things that you do choose to transfer prior to needing Medicaid. Just feel very comfortable that you have enough to get through the 5 years, or that you really, really know that the people that you've given your assets to are still going to have them in 4 years if you need them. And I never really like for somebody to rely on that. You can have perfect children who still end up in a divorce situation or a financial bind. You know, the Fed raised the interest rates 0.75% yesterday, and that's going to change the economy a lot, going to change the cost of housing and interest rates and things. We don't know what's going to happen. If anything happens similar to 08 and 09, we have a lot of children moving back home who've lost everything and lost those jobs, and your money would go with that. There are things called Medicaid Asset Protection Trusts where you can sort of create a trust that holds those assets before the kids get them, so that you know that they can't be lost, but you can't have any further interest in those assets. So it isn't something where you just want to come in and magically transfer everything that you've got into this trust, and then you decide you want to take a vacation or, you know, buy a second home or buy that RV and travel the states, and you got to go ask the kids if they can take some money out of the trust and would they be willing to gift it back to you. And remember, once you've transferred it, they pretty much consider it theirs, so they may or may not give it back to you. Yeah, if you spend it and you spend it legitimately without it being a gift, then, you know, you can spend it on whatever you want to. Travel, have a great time, do what you want to do. And as you're heading to the nursing home, just make sure you're spending your last dollar. Charge your last expense. Right. So that's the estate recovery program. So they file, the North Carolina government is required by federal law to make a claim back in the estate to be reimbursed for everything. So the goal is, there's no exception to that unless the asset's not in the estate. So for example, Mickey can keep his life insurance policy in his name because it's a non-countable asset. It was only a $5,000 face value policy. And when he dies, that company by law has to transfer it to his beneficiary. So if he left it to Minnie, that is not an asset that currently in North Carolina, the North Carolina government can access to pay back. But if he left money in his checking account, or he still owned part of the property in Florida with Walt, that is an asset flowing through his will or flowing through his trust, and they do have a claim against the estate for that. So you got to finish the planning. You can't just get somebody on Medicaid and then walk away and think that you're done. So you have to know exactly what Medicaid program you are receiving benefits from and whether that Medicaid program is covered by the estate recovery provisions. And so the very, very basics of that are that the nursing home coverage counts, the assisted living coverage to the extent that they are providing personal care services to the person in assisted living, which is above and beyond that special assistance benefit, those personal care services are considered to be estate recovery items. And there are some programs that operate in the community that would also be covered. So you have to be very careful. I don't want to sound like I'm tooting the horn for elder law attorneys, but there are times that you can do things that are not spelled out in black and white, that a Department of Social Services social worker cannot tell you about, or a veteran service officer can't tell you about, that are planning techniques where you could potentially preserve an item or tweak it a little bit to make it something else. And all of that is legal and legitimate. It's kind of like seeing your CPA and asking your CPA to give you tax advice. You know, none of us love to write a check to the IRS. We usually ask, well, if I had given a little more to church, or I had given a little more to my alumni association, you know, would that have changed my tax picture? And if he says yes, then you would probably rather choose your own charity, being your church or your alumni association, than the federal government taking the money and providing it to the charitable choice of their own. So Medicaid planning is much like that. There's programs, there's benefits to those programs, and you may very well be entitled. You just may have to tweak a couple of things in order for that to work. That includes after passing. So if you are a family member that gets a notice and you're handling an estate for someone, and you get a notice that the estate recovery is being filed, you know, there are some exceptions to the government being able to take a particular asset. There are some exceptions, for example, if they never told you about the estate recovery program, and they can't show that they proved that they told you, there's ways to get out of some of that. So don't take what I said here for legal advice on each of your individual situations, because everybody's different. And I know that frustrates people. We get a lot of calls. Well, how much will it cost me to have a will drawn? I mean, my staff is instructed you can't quote a fee. We don't know who are they and what do they have and what's their family like. And everybody says they need a simple will until we start asking them about 10 different questions. And then we have a handicapped child, or we have a handicapped grandchild, or we have somebody we want to take out of the will, or, well, I was separated from my husband 20 years ago, but we never got divorced. Oh, well, where is he? And you think he might show up when you die. So we see it every day. So nothing is the same. Nobody takes the same medicine. Nobody has the same medical background. So just need to go see your attorney and make sure you've gone over everything. See your CPA, come and see your SHIP counselors, come to the programs at the senior center, and they'll get you on the right track. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Lynn, have you seen any questions in a chat box or anything? Okay. So while she checks for questions from the folks watching out in computer land, anybody have one for me? Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am, that is completely an example. So most of those things do not have limits when you're spending down the assets. Some people used to go crazy with funeral expenses. And so we do tell people to be cautious. You know, you can't go and just buy all kinds of ancillary things, and really what you're working for is getting a refund back after mom or dad dies, and that doesn't go over too well with social services. They know the average cost of things in our area. Yes, sir. Unfortunately, I can't answer that question in regards to the Medicaid and benefits programs with community assets. I don't know personally of any exceptions in the Medicaid program for somebody to have any additional protections just because their assets came from a community property state. That is different when you're doing will or trust planning. You can, for step up and basis purposes, you can incorporate North Carolina language that allows that property to still be designated community property. Right. And so that would be the logical answer, that a community property state doesn't let you divide and disperse assets separately, whereas in North Carolina, we're not a community state and you can, community property state, and you can move assets. For another example, I mean, state law varies greatly. So if you came today or you're listening out there and you're watching this because mom lives in Virginia and you're trying to get up to speed with how to take care of mom, unless you're bringing her here, please hit stop and don't follow any of these instructions. This is state specific to North Carolina. Retirement accounts, for example, are countable assets in North Carolina. So if I have an IRA or a 401k, those count as part of that basket of the Mickey and Minnie assets before we separate it into countable and non-countable. Those retirement accounts are all countable. But if I move to Georgia and I establish my residency there and I meet all their other qualifications, my retirement account doesn't count. It's a non-countable account. So, you know, you could state shop as well, I guess, if you are comfortable with that. Or if you have kids in multiple different states, you might want to start investigating who you want to go live near. So, yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. So what she's referencing is called the year's allowance application in North Carolina. When you lose a spouse, if you don't want to open a full estate administration and most of your assets are jointly owned or beneficiary designated, so you just have a limited number of assets that were left in that person's individual name when they died, you can apply as the widow for the year's allowance designation, which allows you to transfer to yourself, free of creditors' claims, the first $60,000 of assets that your spouse had in their individual name. And so you have to be careful with what values you put on there. You don't want to run up there and put an estimated amount and then run out of your $60,000. You have to be truthful, but you know, if you're valuing a car, you don't have to take the highest and best value because chances are you've got a nick or a dent or some sap or something on there somewhere, and you can probably lower those values. But that deficiency lasts forever. So as long as I apply within the first year for the spousal allowance, and let's say I use 25,000 of it, and 2 years after my husband dies, I find that he had a stock account somewhere that I didn't know about, and that stock account's worth 20,000, I can use 20,000 more because I have a deficiency judgment. I didn't use my full 60. So if you find assets later, as long as you apply within the first year, you'd be okay. You're avoiding, by doing the year's allowance, you're avoiding having to administer the full estate. So you're avoiding a lot of paperwork by actually doing the year's allowance if the assets are below 60, and you're protecting them from creditors. So let's say your husband had a credit card and he died with a credit card that had a $20,000 balance on it and it was only his card. You get the first $60,000 of value from his estate before the creditors can get anything. And if you have minor children, you get $5,000 extra for each minor child. Okay? Thanks for attending. I appreciate it. Oh.
Thank you to Jennifer, but I also wanted to say that while Jennifer was speaking earlier and she was able to explain about several of the nursing homes or assisted livings in the area, that prompted me to ask the front desk to print out our long-term care guide, which goes into detail of all of the places that are available, whether they are nursing homes, assisted living communities or retirement communities. So if you would like one of these, they're at the little table on your way out. Just feel free to take one. Okay. Thank you, Jennifer, for all of your wonderful information. And thank you all for attending. Have a good day.